In our last video, we introduced the concept of random numbers. And so we have this math.random function, which we then used to sort of randomly decide the color of each square. We also introduced the RGB function, which allows you to have very, very fine control over the exact color that you want to display. So we also looked at the color picker over here on Google, okay? And we were able to pick out a couple of really interesting colors and incorporate those into our project. All right, so what we're going to do this time is, instead of using the random number to set up this whole series of if statements, we're going to just randomly generate a value here inside our RGB function. All right, so I'm going to remove all of this. All right, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say I want my color to be RGB. All right, so what we'll do is we're actually going to generate, we'll generate 3 different random numbers. So I'm actually going to generate the second one, rand2, is math.random, and we'll do a third one. All right, so now we have these 3 different numbers. All right, so I'm going to do, my color is now going to be RGB plus rand, comma, plus rand2, comma, and closing parens. Okay, so remember, color is still a string, just instead of the actual color name like red or green, you can use as the string RGB and then 3 numerical values. Okay, now remember, these values need to be between 0 and 255. Okay, so if I were to save this, okay, you will notice, if I go back here, okay, it made my entire thing black. Wait, that doesn't look very random. Okay, well, and that's because, if you'll recall, math.random returns a number between 0 and 1. Okay, so in other words, every single time it's basically going to be 0. At most it'll be 0.999, and so this is going to be very, very close to black every single time. All right, so what we need to do in order to get this to be between 0 and 256, or 0 and 255, is we just multiply this number by 256. Okay, all right, and so now this will give us the full range of numbers between 0 and 255. Now, there are some very, very slight edge cases, but for the purposes of this simplistic exercise, that's not anything we need to worry about. This will get us close enough. Okay, so now if we were to save this and refresh it, okay, you see we get all kinds of crazy colors, okay? And if we refresh it again, colors completely change. All right, so now we've got just this sort of random smattering of colors all throughout. Okay, now one of the things that I want to point out about the RGB, okay, is that RGB, if I go back to my color picker, okay, so see how when I have, let me go over here to my red section. Okay, so here we are over in red. See how the color has like this kind of gradient that goes from white, okay, and if you head down diagonally, it approaches black. All right, so what you'll notice is that if I vary, let's say in the case of red, okay, if I set my red value at 255 and I set these others at 0, okay, and I can actually type that directly into here, so I can do this. I can do 255, 0, 0, like that. So this gives me extreme red, okay? Now, if I if I leave the green and the blue 0, but I start adjusting this 255 downward, I want you to notice what happens. So here I have this nice, bright, sort of classic red color. All right, I'm going to drop the 255 down to 200. Okay, see how it gets darker? Okay, so basically what it's doing is I'm moving down along this axis here. Okay, and if I were to make it 150, okay, it's even darker. 100, even darker. Okay, 50. Wow, that's really, really dark. It's almost black. You can see a little tinge of red in there, but it's getting really, really dark. And when I get all the way to 0, then I'm at black. Okay? So we can actually use this to kind of create an interesting sort of gradient pattern. So here's what we'll do, is instead of using random 2 and random 3, let me just remove those, okay? Let's change the red pattern, or the red number to our random, and then we'll change these to 0. Okay, so I can actually change it so that it's 0, 0. Okay. All right. And so now what will happen is we're going to get, you know, maybe the first time through we get 0, and then we get 150, and then we get, you know, 250 or whatever. We're going to get different random numbers in here, but they're all going to be variants of red. Okay? And so if we save that and go back to here and refresh, see how now all of the things are red? Okay, and they go from like sort of the bright red color to the very, very dark red. Okay? What if instead of doing the red 0, 0, what if we set our red to the full 255, okay? But then we vary the other 2 variables, okay? So what we have is we now have the red component will always be 255, but then the next 2, the green and the blue, will always be the same random number, whatever it is. So it could be 0, 0, it could be 5, 5, 25, 25, you know, 100, 100, whatever it is, all right? Watch what happens if we do this. Okay? So now we still have this variant of red, but it's more of like the white to red, okay? So in between white and red, you have all these various shades of pink. Okay, so whereas before, when we modified just the red bit, okay, we got red all the way through to black, like sort of a dark red kind of gradient. And when we modify these other 2, then we sort of get a light red swath of colors varying from white to red, so mainly a bunch of pinks in there. Okay, so you can play around with these different values and sort of see what happens when you mess with things. So instead of doing a checkerboard, what would happen if we wanted to just create a straight gradient? Okay, well, that's actually easy enough to do. So if we want to do that, we don't need this inside loop. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. All right, and in this case, we can change. Since we now don't have a top or a left, we'll just modify the left and keep the top fixed at, let's say 100. Maybe 150, doesn't really matter, okay? And so what we'll do is, now instead of using a random number this time, all right, we're just going to do 255, and then instead of rand, we'll do I and I. Okay? Now we need to be careful here because I actually is going to start at 150 and it's going to get past 255 pretty quickly. Okay? So instead of using I, let's go ahead and make a new variable for this. So we'll call this grad for gradient. Okay? And what we'll do is we'll just say outside of the loop, we'll initialize grad to be 0. And then each time through the loop, since we have 8 squares that we're going to build, 255 divided by 8 is roughly 30. So let's just go ahead and add 30 to this each time. Okay, so in other words, the first time through, we will have, I'll put this down here. So the first time we'll have 0. So we'll have 255, 0, 0. Then we'll have 255, 30, 30, 60, 60, 90, 90, etc. Okay, and what you'll notice, okay, so we've taken out all the randomness, is that if we refresh this, I've made some kind of a mistake. And let's see. Color. Oh, it's because I have J right here instead of I. Okay, so let me put that there. And okay, so see what we did? So we started with 255, 255, 255, and then we slowly, and see how we have this nice gradient? Okay, if we remove the border, it'll look even better. Okay, so we can, let's remove this border. Okay, now you can kind of see this nice gradient pattern. If we make these squares really, really small, okay, so let's do this. Let's start from 150 and we'll go all the way up to 255. So 150 plus 255 would be 405. So we'll go 405. Okay, and in this case, we will make, let's make these nice and thin. Let's make them, 10 might be, let's make them 5. Okay, so we'll make these really, really thin squares. Okay, and in this case, what we'll do is we'll just, instead of adjusting the gradient by 30, we'll adjust it by 1. Okay, and if we do that, what you'll see is, oh, I have some kind of a problem in here. Oh, it looks like, oh yeah, because I only went by 255, but I'm incrementing by 5. So if I were to increment this by 1 instead, then what you'll see is, you see how you have a nice, very smooth gradient pattern like that? Okay, so that's kind of what we were trying to go for there, okay? Anyway, so what's the point of all this? The point of all this is that with the RGB function, with random numbers, you can make some pretty interesting color effects, okay? And that's obviously not all you would use random numbers for, but this is just sort of an interesting thing that we can look at. So in our next video, we're actually going to sort of modify our checkerboard pattern, and we're going to come up with something like this, okay? So you probably actually know enough from this video that you could probably create something like this, okay? Because we basically sort of did it already, okay? But we'll go ahead and we'll work through this example in the next video, and we'll take a look and see how it is.